And in the diaspora, which is where we are, typically they're going to add an extra day to a holiday. And there's lots of reasons for that. So if you've noticed that on the calendar, how, well, I thought this was just a 1-day holiday, but it looks like there's 2. If you're in the diaspora, they'll have a day 2 added to it. And that'd be a good topic of discussion someday. But for literal practical purposes, Shavuot has ended here in the Eastern time zone. So some of you are already into the next day, and some of you are still in Shavuot. I realize that. So it should come together pretty nicely, because what I have tonight is really a part 2 of Bamidbar. I wanted to go over those 4 winds because it was so much a part of not just last week's Torah class, it was also a part of the Shavuot service that we did last night. And I have uploaded that for you to your YouTube lists. So when you get your links tonight, I will also include a link to that Song of Songs lesson 32 is what it would actually be. Even if it says Shavuot service, just if you need to rename your file, just rename it Shir HaShirim 32, because that's really what it was. And so that's going to reflect, I think that's how our numbering got off last time. I think I misnumbered that way. And then again, there'll be reminders about our schedule change over the next couple of weeks, because we've got to head down to Mississippi this week to do some recording at HRN. And I didn't want to leave a big gap in the 7 abominations of the wicked lamp recording, not the 7 abominations of the wicked lamp. I would love to leave gaps in that. So it's going to affect this week, and it's going to affect next week. And then the week after, we should be back on schedule. But there's, I uploaded some more Torah portions on Naso to your private playlist. So when you get that tonight, you can check it out. There's stuff on there from the last few years, as well as all the vintage stuff. So that'll help kind of fill in the gap over the next week or 2. Hopefully we can work you in where you can just sit in with a studio recording with me next Tuesday. And maybe, you've probably heard it all before. If you've been in the class for a few years, we went through workbook 2, but it never hurts to review, because sometimes I just think of stuff while I'm sitting there and it's not in the book, it's not anywhere. I just thought of it and said it. So I never know what I'm going to say. So let me share the screen with you. And I'll just warn you, my computer has been crashing big time, but it seems like the only time it's doing it is when we're live on YouTube so far. As far as I know, I haven't crashed just a regular Zoom class, and that might be my problem. I think I'm going to have a new computer to do all the things I need it to do. So if it were to crash, I'll get back on. All right, so our Torah portion this week is Naso, which means to lift up. And it's Numbers 421 through 789, which would be Torah portion number 35. I can't believe we're that far into this. Judges 13:2 through 13:25, Psalm 67, Matthew 6:25 through 34 is the section out of the Brit Hadashah that I chose, but I think there's several that would probably go with this. I'm not locked into that. So here's our Torah memory book for Bamidbar. We're in a new book. And last week we said Bamidbar, in the wilderness, Adonai numbered and organized the Israelites by tribe in order to prepare them for the journey into the land of Israel. In Naso, he's going to organize the Levites. So when he, Naso, lifted the heads of the Levites for service, Moses organized them for the burdens of the tent of meeting. And because Naso is so extensive, we probably could have made 3 pages of our memory book on the topics in Naso. So you may want to work on that a little more than I did. If you're keeping your memory book or if you're doing your note cards on the Torah portions. So last week we did the four winds and the wilderness, and we looked at how Israel faced those four winds, and their job was to be like um, the interaction between the clouds and the earth when it comes to rain, that heaven rains down the blessing when Israel is obedient, when she listens, when she hears, when she obeys, then she's absorbing the moisture of heaven. And then her obedience releases the moisture back up, and it goes back up into the cloud, and then it can fall again. Apparently that was the way this thing was set up. This is the whole point of having a nation of Israel that is beloved, so that she can provide a blessing up on the earth. And so when Israel doesn't obey, when she's rebellious, when she complains, when she grumbles, she's in all sorts of chaos and confusion, then it causes some pretty wild winds to blow around the earth. And so tonight, I'm not really going to go into the individual topics of Naso. I just want to, in general, continue with this theme of the 12 tribes, because in Naso, it talks about how the princes of the 12 tribes brought their gifts and sacrifices to the Mishkan. Each of the 12 tribes offered those. But what we need to remember about this particular Torah portion, it's one of those little fun facts you file away and you may never need it again, but it's a really good GPS, because it seems like everything in the Torah goes back to Mount Sinai and Shavuot. Really, it does. But with these two Torah portions, Bamidbar and Naso, you really do have these bookends, because Bamidbar will precede the Feast of Shavuot, and Naso will always fall just after it. So yes, they're consecutive Torah portions, but their job bookends the actual timing of the Feast of Shavuot. Because remember, we started out in Bamidbar, it talks about the wilderness of Sinai. So yes, Bamidbar is about the wilderness, but he says this is going to be explaining to you more in depth about the wilderness of Sinai, how it relates to the Torah itself, the giving of the Torah. And then Naso will come across the very next week following, and it'll be a little bookend. Again, you know that what's going to be contained in those two Torah portions will very heavily reflect our relationship to the Torah at Sinai. Now, the difference is Naso is extensive, where Bamidbar is, not too many topics. Naso, it's got lots of topics to cover. And we could break down each of those individual ones and look back at their relationship to our general topic. We've been at Mount Sinai, we've erected the Mishkan in the wilderness, but just to kind of give a nod to it before we get back into the four winds, what's interesting is that we've just received the Torah at Sinai. She's just said yes to the covenant. She's just become a voluntary bride in the wilderness. And then right off the bat, in the Torah portion, Naso, we have the instructions on how to deal with a woman suspected of infidelity. Now, most of us read it on a literal level, and it was applied on a literal level from time to time. But the requirements of it in practicality were very difficult to execute. It has more of a spiritual application to it, because Israel being acknowledged as the bride now, because see, we had this incident back here with the golden calf. And so her husband has every reason to keep an eye on her at this point. She apparently has a wandering eye. And so he puts in the elements of what is called the trial of the sotah. not the soda, that's something you drink. Sota is the woman accused. And in modern Hebrew, if you, well, I don't know if I even need to tell you this, but stuck my foot in it. If you want to call somebody a pervert in modern Hebrew, you call him a sote. So this is kind of the counterpart to the sote, the pervert. This is the woman accused of adultery. And of course, we've done a really good job of going over this in workbook 4 and what this represents, the applications of it, the back and forth here between the Jacob and the Esau mentality and so forth, but how ultimately we're talking about Israel, and we're talking about how much dabbling that we might be doing with foreign gods, because by definition, adultery is idolatry, and idolatry is adultery. So right here off the bat, the Israelites know that, that there's a reason here for him to suspect them of unfaithfulness, that if this is their past behavior, it might be part of their future behavior. And indeed, it wasn't that long before the Midianites and the Moabite women seduced a certain number of the men again. So here's a passage out of the portion, Numbers 7, 10 through 17. It says, and the leaders offered the dedication offering for the altar when it was anointed. So the leaders offered their offering before the altar. Then the Lord said to Moses, they shall present their offering, 1 liter each day, for the dedication of the altar. Now, I want you to visualize what the altar looks like. The altar is, of course, square, but there are 4 horns on the altar. That's what I want to focus on. Now, the one who presented his offering on the first day was Nachshon, the son of Aminadab, of the tribe of Judah. And his offering was 1 silver dish, whose weight was 130 shekels, and 1 silver bowl of 70 shekels in sanctuary shekels, both of them full of fine flour mixed with oil as a grain offering. 1 gold pan of 10 shekels, full of incense. Okay, that's beautiful, because we've been studying incense and how it represents prayer and the odors of good deeds. So what are they bringing in the pan full of incense? They are bringing their intention of good deeds and prayer. 1 bull, 1 ram, 1 male lamb, 1-year-old as a burnt offering, 1 male goat as a sin offering, and for the sacrifice of peace offerings, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 male goats, and 5 male lambs, 1-year-old. This was the offering of Nachshon, the son of Aminadab. And then it goes through every single tribe. It doesn't skip any of them. You say, well, this is what the tribe of Judah brought, and so the next 11 tribes did the exact same thing. No, each one is precious. Each tribe is precious. Each member of every tribe is precious. And so he doesn't try to save real estate right here. For every single one, he will repeat what they bring. So this incense piled in the golden pans, they're offering good words, they're offering prayers, they're offering the odors of good deeds in order to dedicate the 4 horns of the altar in the Mishkan. And so put yourself in their sandals. These are very lavish gifts. And when you give away lavish gifts, it's usually because you have a sense of security. You have a feeling of abundance. Now, some people do give out of poverty, but most people in an abundance like this is because somehow they felt secure enough that, hey, I can afford to give this away. And this represents every one of the 12 tribes. I can afford to dedicate this to the Mishkan. We're not going to hold any good gift back from the tent of meeting. And that's a good lesson for us. What are we going to hold back from the tent of meeting? Anything we hold back from the tent of meeting, from our community, from our obedience, from our prayers, from our good words, it's because we have a sense that we don't have enough. We feel like we're too poor to give it away. I mean, stinginess can factor in for sure, but often when we hold things back, it's just we're insecure. We feel like if we give it away, then we'll fall, we'll stumble. And so such gifts like this, it's like you feel abundance, even in the last place. I mean, it's not like there was an employment line. It's not like they were going to get a check. I mean, in a sense, they did get a check. They got manna, they got water, and they got perpetually fresh clothes and shoes. But there's no place like to pursue a career really, unless you're a priest or a Levite or a craftsman of some kind. And so you're not going to accumulate a lot of gold and wealth in the wilderness. There's an isolation there. Remember, the clouds of glory surrounded them. And so even with this feeling of isolation and there's nothing out here, there's no way for me to go out and earn an income. Nevertheless, the 12 tribes heaped these gifts upon the princes of the tribes and said, please donate these on our behalf. And that's the attitude we want to have. We want to be abundant with our gifts that we bring into our tents of meeting, because it's a reflection of, again, when you're in the wilderness, how will you behave? If you behave well in the wilderness, then you're going through excellent gardening techniques 101. You'll know how to behave when you get to the garden. So just as a review, we've got the 12 tribes. They each have their own banners. They count in 4 divisions. And then each divisional banner had a graphic of the 4 living creatures, the lion, the man, the bull, and the eagle. And then we learn there's also 4 angels at each of those directions who can hold back the winds. They can also make them move. It's a natural and a spiritual picture, because remember, wind in Hebrew is ruach, which is spirit. So we're talking about the divine chariot. The 4 symbols represented the divine chariot that Ezekiel's describing. It represents the spirit of Adonai, and wherever he wants it to go, it instantly goes and it doesn't have to turn. This is the way that the Israelites encamped around the Mishkan. They could face any enemy at any time in any direction without turning. And those 4 angels, which I gave you their names last week, they believe that these 4 angels are responsible for the 4 kingdoms. It would be Babylon, Persia, Media, Greece, and Rome. And of course, Rome is still with us. There are still the daughters of Rome. And of course, each kingdom is connected to the kingdom before it. And Babylon is even connected, even though these are the 4 beast kingdoms, they are the seed or the descendants of the serpent, which was Egypt, or Pharaoh in Egypt. So in essence, these 12 tribes are watching over both the camp and the tabernacle, which was called Adonai's vineyard. And as we studied, when we looked at the rise of these 4 kingdoms, and then the last kingdom, Rome, how that came about, we can see how when the vineyard of Israel declines, then it leads to the rise of the 4 kingdoms. When Israel begins to arise and stand up to its spiritual obligations, that's when you realize that the kingdom is on the decline. So this is a long quotation, but I wanted to put the whole thing in there, and I threw it in there early so you wouldn't have to process it as it got later. And it's truly something you might want to pull up later and read it a few times, because I did, but it's from a rabbinic source called Ner Mitzvah, which means the light of the commandment. And what I want to look at here again is just augment what we're talking about with the 4 winds, the 4 kingdoms, the 4 symbols, how the 4 divisions of the 4 tribes, as long as they were moving with the spirit of the cloud, of the ark, and so forth, then they were standing against the damaging forces of these 4 winds. And instead, heaven was able to turn them into blessings, not just over Israel, but across the whole earth. That was their point, to be a light to the nations. And so here's what the source says. It says, because these empires have importance within the world, we're talking about the four kingdoms, by the way, Babylon, Persia, Media, Greece, and Rome. Because these empires have importance within the world, therefore, there must be within the world exactly four empires corresponding to the differentiation inherent in this world. And there does exist in the world an aspect of unity, and corresponding to this is Yisrael, who are unified. It's referring to their encampment in the wilderness, how they camped in unity. However, in truth, it's fitting that there should be these four empires connected and joined together with Israel and enjoined to Israel until everything is one. In other words, there's a reason these four beast kingdoms are in the world, and it's connected to Israel's prophetic destiny. But on account of the lack of inherent in a created entity, which is inherent within creation, which definitionally must lack perfection. It's impossible for our creation to be as such, for as we have seen, the creating entity must be distinct from the created entity. And specifically, in our time, before the kingship of Israel, on account of this, the lack of kingship of Israel, we deviate from the unity of Hashem until the four empires end and the king, the Messiah, comes. Okay, in a nutshell, it's going to take King Messiah to unite Israel. And this is what's going to counteract these four beast kingdoms. Therefore, vis-a-vis this lack, the four empires became distinct. But when their rulership ends, so the world will indeed become complete, as has always been fitting. Therefore, in conjunction with the creation of the world, these four empires were hinted at and concealed, and also Israel, as it's written in the verse. And the Lord said, "Let there be light," etc. This is the light of Messiah. For all this, the unfolding of world history in this order was necessary from the outset of creation, no later than when Hashem actually made his world. Therefore, Daniel said in his prophecy, "In my vision at night, I saw the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. Four mighty beasts, different from each other, emerged from the sea." And remember, the sea represents the nations. Daniel said that these four winds were stirring up the great sea, as we have said, that these four lie in the four directions which differ, as we've explained. As such, it was said in Daniel 7, 2-7, "In my vision at night, I saw the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. Four mighty beasts, different from each other, emerged from the sea." And it is said these specifically four winds stirring up the sea, as we've explained, for these four are like the four directions which represent differentiation in this world, as we have explained. So that was pretty academic and pretty long, but I wanted you to get an overview of the way that the rabbis were thinking about books like Daniel. And if you can kind of get their mindset as they read about books like Daniel, as they interpret the encampments of the 12 tribes, then as we make our way into the book of Revelation, we can even understand John's mindset. And so when Daniel sees these things coming up out of the sea, of course, the rabbis aren't going to have the context of the book of Revelation, but what they understood about it can add to what we understand about the book of Revelation, and how important it was for those encampments to be set just the way that they were in order to face the four winds, in order to stand against the damaging power of the four winds and the four beast kingdoms. Where would the world be today if Israel had not been present in the earth through the kingdoms of Babylon, Persia, Media, Greece, and up to the time of Rome today. Where would the world be? We say, well, they've been pretty weak. Well, no matter how weak they might have been, nevertheless, the world has not descended into complete chaos. Chaotic, yes, but not complete chaos, because that light, remember the source is called Ner Mitzvah, the light of the mitzvah. The Torah is a light, the commandment is a lamp. No matter where Israel was scattered, and no matter under which of these four beast kingdoms, they have always been able to hold on to the light and to be a light. Whether it was dim or whether it was bright, they've always been able to maintain their testimony. And so that's a great encouragement to us. And so what they're talking about is when King Messiah comes, he will be able to gather in Israel. He will be able to focus and to concentrate the light. And therefore, these four kingdoms, which were down to Rome at this point, remember, they just passed things along to one another, even though they were each distinct from one another. There was never anyone so thrilled with Greek mythology as Romans, and they incorporated it into Roman mythology. And the Greeks borrowed from the Persians and the Medes, and the Persians and the Medes borrowed from the Babylonians. And so you might say it's all Babylon, it's all Rome, it's all Persia, because really they're passing these things down to one another, but yet there's a distinct identity to each kingdom. Each kingdom did accomplish something in the earth. And so when King Messiah comes, the time of these kingdoms will be over, because they will be regathered in their encampments. And, once they come together, once they are placed in those encampments, like we read about in last week's Torah portion, they once again face the four winds, then we understand, because we read the parable of the Yeshua in the boat on the Sea of Galilee, we understand that through the power of Messiah, that those four winds are going to be tamed. They are going to act in harmony, just like Israel is going to act in harmony. And as they act in harmony, the winds are going to act in harmony, and it's going to bring a blessing upon the face of the earth. Here again is an Aramaic commentary to Genesis 2, which it's translated from the Aramaic explanation into the English in Targum Yonatan. And I also match this with Jeremiah 49:36. We're still looking at these four winds. We want to learn as much about them as we can. He says, I will bring on Elam, and Elam is in, I want to say it's where Iran is today. It's pretty far east when you say Middle East. He says, I will bring upon Elam the four winds from the four ends of heaven, and will scatter them to all these winds. And there will be no nation to which the outcasts of Elam will not go. So Elam was part of this Persian Median history, window of history, in which Israel was in captivity. And so the prophecy here in Jeremiah, I don't know that it's so important to know that the inhabitants of Elam were scattered. It's just pointing out that the four winds here are iconic. The four winds from the four ends of heaven, this control from heaven, it has the power to scatter, or it has the power to regather. And then here's what the Targum says. It says, the Lord God created man in two formations and took dust from the place of the house of the sanctuary. We've studied that. And from the four winds of the world. We haven't really studied that. We know that mankind, the tradition is that the original Adam, that the dust of his physical body was gathered from the Temple Mount. And that's what was used to form the physical body. But this adds something else. It says, and from the four winds of the world, and mixed it from all the waters of the world. Okay, so here you see why Israel would be needed to represent four winds. And then it says the waters of the world. We've talked about how the sea represents the nations. And says, and created him red, black, and white, and breathed into his nostrils the inspiration of life. And there was in the body of Adam the inspiration of a speaking spirit unto the illumination of the eyes and the hearing of the ears. So this Aramaic explanation of the Hebrew from 1st or 2nd century, I can't remember, it's clarifying to the listener that mankind was not just made from the dust of the earth and from water, but also the four winds of the world are incorporated into him. That's part of who he is. And if you'll remember, on Reuven's degel, on his banner, his divisional banner, he had the banner that had the symbol of a man. You know, Ephraim had the bull, Dan had the eagle, Judah had the lion, but on Reuven, we have the symbol of a man. And so we can see that, you know, as these four banners represent the spirit of Adonai, why one would look like a man? Because according to this, according to the explanation, that part of the way that we were made was incorporating the four winds of the world. And of course, we know that they're facing in the four directions. Here's another reference, and it explains a little bit about what I was saying earlier about how Israel affects rainfall, how their obedience affects rainfall in the earth. I'm not going to go over that again with you because I think I covered it pretty well last night in the Shavuot service, and you'll get that recording if you haven't heard it. But just in a nutshell, disobedience on the part of Israel will close off the clouds of blessing, but obedience will release them. Disobedience throws the four winds into chaos. Obedience brings them into harmony. And that quotation there is from Ta'anit 3b. So let's see how it looks in the book of Revelation. In Revelation 7:1, it says, after this, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun. Now that's significant. If he's coming from the rising of the sun, he's coming from the east. He's coming from the direction that Judah faced with the lion. And the wind from the east is associated as a blessing with bringing light. But on the flip side, remember, we've got an obedient side and we've got a disobedient side. When Israel's not being obedient, then the east wind can be the most damaging of all. It'll wither everything into nothing. It'll blow in the famine. It'll blow in the heat. It'll blow in way more light than you want. It's, you know, the sun will rise and it'll smile while it kisses you to death. It's a hot east wind, and it was associated with the plagues on Egypt, you know, with the plague of the locusts and so forth. So it's a very damaging wind. So this angel ascends from the rising of the sun, having the seal of the living God. And he cried out with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. That's Revelation 7:1-4. So again, you can see in the sealing of the first fruits of these tribes, their first fruits, so they're going to represent the rest of the encampment. These are, this number, I believe, is actually related to what happened later with the Moabite women. And you see, sweetie, don't be grumpy. when we start counting up the numbers of warriors that had to be raised up to fight against the Midianites and the Moabites, if you do a little bit of math and then you pay attention to the difference in the way that the tribes are listed in the book of Revelation, you'll come up with 144,000. And that will be in the next Becky book. I want to say we studied it a couple years ago, maybe. At any rate, I know it's somewhere in your playlist. We'll walk down Allergy Lane today. But we can see the blessing of the sealing of the sons of Israel. From the east will be a blessing of light. But for the disobedient, something else is coming. Excuse me. They have to go get a refill. Thanks. Got something in the throat. Okay, and we looked at this again last night, so I don't want to really go over it in detail. But again, when we look at the wave offering of the sheaves of the barley at Passover and how they are connected to Shavuot in the text, there's a reason why they waved them the way that they did wave them. It says the movements forward and backward were to counteract the effects of injurious winds. And the movements upward and downwards were to counteract the effect of injurious dews. So again, there's in the sacrifices of the temple, which reflect the obedience of Israel, there's a literal, physical, natural effect upon the weather. And that's something for us to keep in mind. When we know bad weather is coming, then we need to check ourselves for obedience. What about, this gold bowl full of incense? Have we brought our prayers? Have we brought good words? Have we brought good deeds into the tent of meeting? Have we demonstrated this goodwill and these good intentions? Because we can't always attribute natural disasters to human disobedience, although we can take it right back to the Garden of Eden. Sometimes the wind blows where it blows, but because there's always the possibility that the behavior of Israel has allowed some chaos to slip into the system, or it could have held back something that was already going to happen. Because you see the angels, they're holding back, like the chaos could come. And so that obedience on our part, maybe there's supposed to be a tornado come through our area, but if we maintain who we are in the covenant, it may be that tornado never comes. We don't know. That's the beauty of it. Because we don't know it, I think it provokes us to stay in a really humble attitude of prayer. This is from Zechariah 1:14 through 21. And it says, so the angel who was speaking with me said to me, proclaim, saying, this is what the Lord of armies says. Remember in the last Torah portion, we took a census of an army. I am exceedingly jealous for Jerusalem and Zion, but I am very angry with the nations who are carefree. For a while, I was only a little angry. They furthered the disaster. Therefore, the Lord says this, I will return to Jerusalem with compassion. My house will be built in it, declares the Lord of armies, and a measuring line will be stretched over Jerusalem. And this is why I said last week, when we look at the qualities of the four winds, it's not from the perspective of any other nation on earth. It's only from the perspective of Jerusalem, because the east wind may behave differently in Canada or New Zealand or California. The west wind may behave differently. So the measuring line is stretched over Jerusalem. How the winds will behave is based on what's happening right there. He says, again, proclaim, saying, this is what the Lord of armies says. My cities will again overflow with prosperity, and the Lord will again comfort Zion and choose Jerusalem. That tells you, that prophesies of a behavior change in Israel. Then I raised my eyes and looked, and behold, there were four horns. This is why I wanted you to pay attention that they were bringing the 12 princes were bringing the gifts to the altar. The altar has four horns. So I said to the angel who was speaking with me, what are these? And he said to me, these are the horns that have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. And someday we need to have a discussion of why he will break that down into three sections. But he's saying specifically it's horns. We've been talking about the wind scattered them. Now he says these are the horns that have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. Well, we're about to get an additional thing to write down in a note. If you take notes, you want to note this. It's as important as knowing the characteristics of the four winds. Then the Lord showed me four craftsmen. And I said, what are these coming to do? And he said, these are the horns that have scattered Judah, so that no one lifts up his head. All right, last Torah portion, the heads were lifted up for a census. Naso, you lift up the head of the Levites. You're going to take a census of who's there to do the Levitical service. So lifting up the head is like being counted. And so he says, these horns have scattered Judah, and you can't even take a census of them. But these craftsmen have come to frighten them, to throw down the horns of the nations who have lifted up their horns against the land of Judah in order to scatter it. Now think of how many times horns are mentioned in the book of Revelation on these beasts. Now we're getting another element. The horns are like the winds. We could call it an equivalent expression. And then Zechariah goes on in chapter 2, verse 6. He says, you there, flee from the land of the north, declares the Lord, because I have spread you out like the four winds of the heavens, declares the Lord. So you match these two passages, chapter 1, chapter 2. And chapter 1, he's calling these forces horns. In chapter 2, he's calling these forces winds. And you say, okay, now I've got a new lens to read Revelation. And then the footnote in the JPS to not, and I saw four horns. The little note there says the four horns correspond to the four winds of verse 10. The altars had four horns, suggesting the four winds and divine chariot, placing an offering within it. Now, this is my commentary. I should have made it in a different color. When you see these princes bringing their gifts to be offered within the four horns of the altar, then the suggestion is you're taking your sacrifice and placing it within the perfect will of Adonai. That's what the altar represents. You become the sacrifice to his will. And so the horns represent the nations. They're moved as the four wind angels obey their orders. But it's the boundaries of Israel that preserve the boundaries of the nations, their winds and their horns, if that makes sense. You might have to think about that a while. But think of what was going on in the temple or in the Mishkan when the 12 tribes brought their sacrifices to the horns of the altar. They placed themselves within the perfect will of Adonai. And when that happens, those 4 horns that represent the nations, then it will affect those wind angels. And this is how Israel was to be a preservative for the nations. So, how are we doing on time? Not well. So we're back in the wilderness. And it says God spoke to Moses in the Sinai wilderness. We're going back here to a commentary from Bamidbar. Anyone who does not make themselves ownerless like the wilderness cannot acquire the wisdom and the Torah. Therefore, it says the Sinai wilderness. And this is, again, what we see, that it was the wilderness where the Torah was given. It wasn't given in the glory of the Temple Mount. It wasn't given in the glory of a palace. It was given in a desert, in the sand, on a mountain. And it said that the Torah was given through 3 things. Fire, we saw that. Water, we saw that, because remember it says the heavens dripped. And wilderness. How do we know it was through fire? Well, Mount Sinai was all in smoke. And Adonai came down on it in fire. How do we know it was given through water? Well, it says so in Judges 5:4. The heavens dripped, the clouds dripped water. How do we know it was given through wilderness? It says God spoke to Moses in the Sinai wilderness. So why these things? Just as fire, water, and wilderness are free to all the inhabitants of the world. They haven't seen my water bill. So too are the words of Torah free to them. As it says in Isaiah 55:1, oh, all who are thirsty, come for water, even if you have no money. So anyone who does not make themselves ownerless like the wilderness cannot acquire the wisdom and the Torah. This is why it says the Sinai wilderness. What exactly does that mean? It means there is a personal poverty that you have to accept. Again, he doesn't give the Torah to you in a palace. He gives it to you in a desert place. And how many times in this walk, if you've been walking long enough in the Torah, have you felt like you were alone? Have you felt like there was nothing around you to reinforce what you were doing? When you felt like you were in the most humble of circumstances because you fit nowhere. And he says, that's exactly what you need to be. This is how I can speak to you. I can't speak to you in a palace. I can't speak to you in Egypt. I can't speak to you in your lofty place. I can't speak to you in your place of security. I can't speak to you in your place of abundance. You have no need of me there. But when I take you into the wilderness and I have you to feel the poverty, that's when you can hear me. That's when I can actually speak to you. I need you to feel insecure. I need you to feel unsure. I need you to feel rootless. Even though you're hanging on to the most ancient roots of all, we still feel rootless because we don't have community. And he says, this is where I will form you. This is where I'll make you into a community. This is where I can assign you your camp. And so he prophesies how he's going to retake his wilderness Israel. When she's in exile, how is he going to recover her? How is he going to draw her into a great cloud of witnesses like the camp in the wilderness? Well, in these prophecies from Hosea, He's going to use the feasts. And I don't know how many people have come into the Torah through a Shabbat or the feasts. So maybe this is not an accident, that this is how we come in. He says, I'm going to repossess your feasts. I'm going to repossess the barley and the wheat feasts. I'm going to repossess Pesach and Shavuot in your life. I'm going to repossess your Sukkot. And I'm going to take you, the wilderness, and I'm going to restore you, and I'm going to make a garden out of you. All the great things that are concealed in you are going to begin to blossom. The Sukkot is already in you. Shavuot is already in you. Pesach is already in you. He needs to bring you into the wilderness so it can bloom. Hosea 2:3 says, I will make her like a wilderness, make her like a desert land. But then he says in 2:9, I will take back my grain at harvest time and my new wine in its season. I will also put an end to all her gaiety, her feast, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her festal assemblies. Whatever feast you've been celebrating, when he takes you out into the wilderness, he's going to put an end to them. And then he says, I will punish her for the days of the Baals, when she used to offer sacrifices to them and adorn herself with earrings and jewelry and follow her lovers, so that she forgot me, declares the Lord. Therefore, behold, I will allure her, bring her into the wilderness, and speak kindly to her. Then I will give her her vineyards from there, not from a palace. He will bring you into the wilderness. And you have to wonder, like, well, how is he going to punish her for the days of her festivals to the Baals? How's he going to punish her for her alternate calendars that he's describing? Well, maybe it's exactly what I just said. Maybe it's the way that once you begin to undergo the transformation, maybe that feeling of being very alone, that feeling of being very different from everybody around you, maybe that feeling of worry because you know your friends and family might be caught up in alternate calendars. Maybe that's part of the punishment. It's the regret and the concern. Now that you know, there will be concern. You're going to set yourself apart through the Moedim, but you're going to feel very awkward doing it. And he says, it's because I'm luring you into the wilderness so I can speak kindly to you, so you can hear me. You're not going to hear me over the noise if I let you stay where you are. And he says, if you will come into the wilderness with me, you're going to find your vineyard there. That's where it's concealed. Your vineyard is concealed in your lonely places. Your vineyard is concealed in those places where you feel disconnected from what everybody else is doing. Your vineyard is concealed in feeling like the oddball who doesn't eat like everybody else at the office. That's where your vineyard's concealed. And so we look back at the Israelites and say, learn the lesson. Don't grumble, don't complain. Just believe. Just believe that there's a point to this. And that's where Matthew 6:28 comes in. Yeshua says, why are you worried about clothing? Notice how the lilies of the field grow. They don't labor, nor do they spin thread for cloth. Yet I say to you that not even Shlomo in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more clothe you? That's exactly what he did in the wilderness. Their clothes didn't wear out. He kept clothes on their backs. You have little faith. Don't then worry, saying, what are we to eat or what are we to drink? That's what the Israelites did. We want something to eat. We want meat. All we have is this manna. We want all the stuff we had in Egypt. He's saying, don't do that. As Grandpa would say, whoop, 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 whoop. Mm-mm. No, don't complain about the water. What are we to drink? What are we to wear for clothing? He says the nations eagerly seek all these things. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. He knows this when he brings you into the wilderness. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things are going to be provided to you. That's why he brings you into the wilderness. That's why it feels so awkward, because you're trading your kingdom for his. And the wilderness is going to provoke a lot of questions, and it's going to answer a lot of these questions. You will find out who you're serving in the wilderness. You'll find out if you're serving your career, your family, your friends. You say, well, I have to serve my family. You cannot idolize your family. You serve your family, but you do not idolize them. Are you serving friends? Are you seeking recognition? Are you happy with conveniences? Do you have to have the latest fashion or car or home? Are all these things number one priority, or is your number one priority to listen in the wilderness and seek his kingdom? He says, if so, you know what? He'll give you those things that you need. He'll give you the things you need, not necessarily the things you want. And that's what I found in hindsight. Sometimes you can pray and pray and pray and pray, and the Father won't give you what you want, but he'll give you what you need in order to keep him first. And so the midbar, remember the root of the midbar is devar. It means word. And if we say devarim, plural, it means things. You get into the midbar, you get into the wilderness to find out whether you're overly attached to devarim or things. In fact, the next book is devarim, things, words. So are you attached to the word, or are you attached to the things of the world, not the word? So, we tend to discount the importance of preparing in the wilderness, but we're taken into the wilderness to grow spiritually. There's a spiritual growth that has to happen there that can't happen anywhere else. What happens there allows us to learn how to release our light to the nations, so that it's one thing to be caught up into a cloud of witnesses, and that will definitely happen. But in the millennial kingdom, there's 1,000 years, and Yeshua needs capable servants. He can trust them to go out and be a light to the nations instead of absorbing the darkness of the nations the second they're out of sight. And he prepares us to be that light in the wilderness by pushing away the supports. Everything we thought was secure, we've seen that definitely over the last couple of years. He's knocked away every crutch. Everything we thought was secure, dependable, good, honest, it's crumbling. It's our midbar. It's our wilderness. And he says, trust me. Just trust me. Don't get caught up in a resurrection doctrine where, you get caught up out of the trouble. You float along on a cloud with a harp. He says, no, I want you to be an influence. I'm going to protect you. But that protection is to grow you to a place where you can be an influence on the world, not just float around harping on your harp. So again, here's the review. And in this, I thought it would be fun to, if you've done Creation Gospel Workbook 1, you know how the symbols of the creation work chiastically. And so I didn't set up a chiasm for you. I didn't have time to draw out a graphic of it. I might have to get somebody to do that for me. But just for kicks and giggles, this may not even apply, but just for kicks and giggles, if we look at the 7-branch menorah, and you know how I usually fold that menorah to show you how it's really only 4 branches. 4 is 7 and 7 is 4. Well, we know that Ephraim camped on the west, and the west wind is associated with darkness. Well, that's what we had on day 1. We had darkness. It had to be The light had to be separated from it. Day 2, we had the waters separating from the waters. We had very chaotic waters. In the north, we know that the tribe of Dan faced that side, and in the north comes the very chaotic waters like hail and snow and heavy rains like floods. Day 3, he makes the plants, he makes the trees, he separates the earth from the waters. In the south, we have Reuven. And what does he bring? He brings the dews and the showers. And remember, originally it was this kind of water that watered the earth. It was like a mist came up. It was the very gentle waters. And then on day 4, we had the light, sun, moon, and stars set in the heavens. And to the east, we have Judah encamping, and from there comes the light, as well as the heat. And so if you were to set that up chiastically, you would see again how it'll make a menorah. The idea here, though, is these people, these tribes, they had to be warriors. They had to take courage. They had to do and hear the word. And Yeshua says, you know what? Don't worry. If you're worried, it's because you may not be satisfied with food, shelter, and clothing in the wilderness. It worries you that you might be in a wilderness and not have enough. Remember when I said the princes brought all this stuff? Well, they had to have felt pretty secure at the moment, or you wouldn't be giving away all this stuff. You would be hoarding and stockpiling and prepping and backpacking, all the stuff you thought you could carry. I don't know where you're going to carry it, but when people are concerned about the future, they tend to hoard things like even toilet paper. And he says, don't worry. Don't worry. You're going to feel like there's no one on duty. But the truth is, you're on duty. If you're feeling insecure, if you're worried, it's because you haven't recognized who's in charge. You are. I put you on warrior duty. And if you're still worried about your food, shelter, and clothing, then it's because you're still in a bondage to Egypt. You even though it wasn't God having a taskmaster over you, nevertheless, you knew somebody was in charge. And so I brought you out of Egypt. I took you away from your harsh taskmaster, and now you're bewildered because you don't know what to do with all this personal freedom. Well, the thing to do with all your personal freedom is you're still going to serve. You're going to serve the Holy One, but he's putting a huge amount of personal responsibility on you as a free person. And the huge part of that responsibility is, don't worry. Trust me, I will take care of what you need, not what you want. And that's as far as the East is from the West in most of us. Some people have learned to live a very simple life, but we have so many conveniences today that often what we want and what we need are the North and the South Pole. And so now Israel has to adjust to the idea that they are on duty and their success depends upon their relationship with Adonai. That's it. They can't hoard up for themselves. It won't work. It'll go to worms. They have to obey. But they say, no, I want to hoard up real food. I want to, save up real water. I want to have my closet full of real clothes. And he says, no. Trust me for those things. You be on duty. You obey me. This is what's important. I want you to feel a little insecure, but I don't want you to worry. I want you to feel insecure enough to trust me. And if you're not trusting me yet, then you're not comfortable in the wilderness yet. There's still some gardening techniques that you need to learn. Because if you realize once they got to the land and the spies saw the size of the fruit in the land, all of a sudden the manna started looking pretty good. They didn't want to go in. I mean, they were getting easy food, easy water, and easy clothing. Maybe it wasn't much, but it looked way better than all the work you'd have to do to get that much fruit. So now they had a new thing to complain about. At first, it was like, we don't like the food and the water. And now it's like, the food and the water is fine. We don't want to go work. And so it's like, you can't please an Israelite. But the second generation, they learn those lessons. And so let's just make up our minds. We're going to have a second generation mentality about the Torah. We're going to trust him to provide our food, shelter, and clothing. And we're going to put ourselves on duty. Let's see. I know our time's up. Well, let's see. Where do I want to go? That's too far to go. Let's just skip ahead a little bit. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go through these slides a little slower. And that way, when you watch your recording, you can stop and think about anything that I skip. And then here's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:1. He says, moreover, brethren, I don't want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud. Remember the 7 clouds we talked about last week? All our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Messiah. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. And he says, now these things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. And don't become idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Nor let us commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in one day, 23,000 fell. That's the Torah portion where you want to chase down those 144,000. Nor let us tempt Messiah, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed by serpents. You see how he's talking about, last week we talked about the positioning of the 7 clouds and how they protected Israel. And now Paul is describing to you how that cloud cover didn't help them in any of those directions when they committed these types of sins. Like the serpents, the cloud below them couldn't protect them from the serpents when they grumbled and complained and rebelled. It says, nor complain, as some of them also complained, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now, all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. So that's our example. As we go into this great cloud of witnesses, we have to remember that's exactly what we're there to do. We are there to witness to the awesome power of our Creator. And if the testimony that is coming out of our mouths is constant complaining, constant craving, constant, I want this, I want that, I don't want this, I don't want that. I prefer this, not that. I want to be this, not that. Well, see, those are the sorts of things that will break down your cloud cover. Because if you are part of a great cloud of witnesses, then your witness needs to be consistent with everyone else in the cloud. And we all need to be testifying to the miraculous power of the one who brought us out of Egypt. And just because he has brought us into a wilderness where the conditions are not ideal is no excuse for a lot of complaining and feeling like a victim. We're not victims. We are priests. We are priests to the nation. We're a kingdom of priests. And it's time to start acting like it. So we're in an incubation period. I was going to read you a little excerpt out of Rabbi Kahn's book, A River Flowed from Eden, but we won't do that so much. But we need to respect these boundaries. We need to respect the fact that the way that we encamp and that where he has scattered us, we saw that in that rabbinic commentary, even where he scattered you, you can maintain your testimony. You can exercise that testimony. You can flex those muscles no matter where you are. You can learn habits of not complaining. You can learn habits of trusting. You can learn habits of not pursuing after worldly things. You can learn habits of not worrying what the rest of the world is doing. You can learn all those things even in the exile. And so when he gathers you back in and sets you within your boundaries, imagine the power, the united power of Israel. When we have collected a great cloud of true witnesses who have made A's in gardening techniques. The rebellion and the complaining, that's when you get an F in Gardening Techniques 101. So in Jewish thought, the way that a human being expends his spirit or his ruach is through words. Remember how in the beginning I showed you that quotation there that says that not just the dust of the earth and the waters, but that mankind was also formed through the four winds. That's part of who he is. And again, it's represented on the banner of Reuven in the camp. And they say one way you can expend your spirit and deplete yourself as a human being is through words. If you speak words of truth like they were bringing in those golden pans, then you can be sustained. But it says many words will deplete you. Even if there's a little bit of wise thought sprinkled in among them. I was trying to remember this quote last week and I found it. And in Sefer HaChinuk, it says, we should not be called a member of a group of fools as we expend all our spirit in words. For even in much waste matter, a little food is found at times. We don't want to just let a bunch of crap come out of our mouths and hope people can find a little morsel of something uplifting. We don't need to be vomiting a bunch of complaining and hope people can find a morsel of something good in our vomit. No. He's saying your spirit is represented by your words, the words that you exhale, that come out of your mouth. And if you're going to be a good and faithful witness, if you're going to be caught up into a cloud of witnesses, you're not going to be in a place where those sorts of waste products are acceptable. In fact, you have to go outside the camp if you're coming up with that kind of crap. Remember, it said that the manna was pure food, and unless you left the camp and started eating regular food, then you really didn't have any need for a latrine. But he says, when the army goes out, they're going to have to take a trowel because their bodies are going to undergo a change. They're going to start eating the food of the land if they're out there making war, and then their body functions are going to kick in, and they're going to need to dig latrines. Well, let our be speech such that it's as though we are inside the cloud, that we are eating the pure manna of heaven. It's a pure food. And we shouldn't just be throwing words out there that will deplete us and discourage others who are just vainly working their way through our words, trying to find something encouraging, trying to find that good word, trying to find that smoke of incense anywhere. So Ezekiel 37, 9 through 10. This would probably be a good place to wrap it up since we're late already. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of man, and say to the breath, the Lord God says this, come from the four winds, breath, and breathe on these slain so that they come to life. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath entered them, and they came to life and stood on their feet, an exceedingly great army. And that's what we just read last week in Bamidbar. The census was for numbering the army. 12 tribes, one army. And then in this week, Naso, the princes of the 12 tribes are bringing gifts, identical gifts for the unity of the Mishkan. And that's the place he wants to bring us to. We will feel so secure in where we are and who he is that we will give an abundance even in the wilderness. We will place ourselves, our gifts, inside the horns of those altars and say, yes, I want to be a light to the nations. I'm going to quit complaining about where he's placed me and what I don't have. And I am going to start exercising and releasing my light to whatever wind I'm scattered to. I embrace it, because in the same way that that wind caused chaos, through my obedience, through my good words, through my good deeds, through my faithfulness to the Holy One, we can begin to tame these four winds. And they will become a protection for us. We have to start seeing ourselves as this army, a resurrected army of priests. And so the same way that you think you would speak when you brought your gifts into the Mishkan, that's the way we need to speak all day long. Okay.